All right, graphing with a T-chart. So while I recognize that this way to graph a line might be a little bit tedious, it is a cut and dry way that will always work. So I want to show this before we show our shortcuts. So a T-chart is something like this. You put your X, your Y. That right there is a T-chart. And what I like to do is I like to pick some points, pick some X points, and then I'm going to plug them into our equation here and get our Y out of it. Now this equation here is called our parent function. It is the most simple line that we have. One could say that all other lines are just this line kind of shifted around. So for lines, I'm okay with us picking just 3 points, but I do want 3 points, not just 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick things near 0 that are easy to plug in. Now, easy to plug in, normally I would look at our equation here and think about, well, what could I plug in easily for X to get a nice, pretty answer? In this case, there isn't a whole lot of constraint on that. Whenever we get to problem number 3, I'll show you what I mean by that. But I'm just going to do -2, 0, and 2. So I plug in -2. If I plug in a -2 in for X, then I get Y equals -2. So there I am, -2. Not very exciting. It stays the same. 0 goes to 0, and 2 goes to 2. So I've already got point 0, 0 graphed, and just so that we know, what I'm doing here is I'm making this as the point -2, -2, where this is my X and there's my Y. And I'm graphing those points. So here's that point, here's the other point, the 2, 2, and now I need to graph my actual line. My line will go through those 3 points, and lines always have arrows on the end, right? A line goes on forever. A segment has an ending point, but a line goes on forever. So we need to use our little arrows on there. All right, and that is our line. All right, number 2, let's go ahead and draw our T-chart, X, Y. Now number 2 is kind of one of those trick questions. It's X equals 1, and if we remember from our vocab, X equals 1 is a vertical line. So whenever I grab my X values, I can only have 1, so I'm going to have 1, 1, and 1. Now whenever I do Y, there's no Y listed in our equation here. So we can pick anything we want. I'll say -3, 0, and 4, just cause. So I'm going to put a point at 1, -3. I'm going to put a point at 1, 0, and a point at 1, 4. Those 3 points make this line right here. And we have our arrows on the end. And there we are. There's our vertical line. Now, whenever you have a homework assignment and it says X equals 1, I'm okay with it if you skip the T-chart part and you just go straight to graphing it. But I just wanted to show you it this way. That way it doesn't catch you off guard whenever you have homework over it. So again, I'm okay with it if you skip the T-chart for this problem. But I wanted to show you what it would look like, what it could potentially look like. All right, number 3, a little bit more of an interesting problem. We have X, Y. Now, normally whenever I pick my points, like I said, number 1, I like to pick points that will come out kind of pretty. So what I'm going to look at here is I'm going to look at this -1/3 in front of my X. Because whenever I plug something in there, I'm going to have to divide it by 3. That's what my 1/3 means. So whenever I plug in things, I want things that will be integers, will be real numbers, will be like counting numbers after I divide by 3. So I'm going to pick -3, because -3 divided by 3 is 1, which is a nice number. I'm going to pick 0, and I'm going to pick 3. So whenever I plug in -3, I'm going to say, well, I'll do -3 first, -3. I'll say, well, -1/3 times -3 plus 2, I'll say Y equals that. This is Y equals, well, -1/3 times -3 is going to be +1 plus 2, which is 3. So I got a 3 out of there. Now whenever I go to do the 0, I'm going to have Y equals -1/3 times 0 plus 2. Well, -1/3 times 0 is 0 plus 2, which is 2. So I got a 2 out of there. And last up, I have y equals negative 1/3 times 3 plus 2. Well, negative 1/3 times 3 is negative 1 plus 2, which is 1. Right? So a lot of the problems that you do, you're actually going to have to do a little bit of math off to the side and plug the numbers in. Now that we've plugged the numbers in, though, we can just plot our points. So I'm going to zoom right in on here. And my first point is negative 3, 3. So I'm like right there. 0, 2 goes there, and 3, 1 goes there. So now I can graph my line, put my arrows on it, and we're done. There's my line. And like I said, there's going to be shortcuts, but I want us to know how to use a T-chart. All right. Number 4. For number 4, we're going to have to, well, we'll start off by putting our T-chart in, x, y. And almost all the time I like to use 0, because 0 times anything is 0, so I don't get an ugly fraction there. And now I want to look at my fraction in front of my x, negative 7/2. What we care about here is the 2 in the denominator, because that's what we're going to have to divide by, and we want to make it to where that 2 goes away. We want to have integers. So I'm going to I'll plug in negative 2 and positive 2. That way they look nice. That way our numbers come out nice. So negative 2 and positive 2. So whenever I go to plug in, I'm going to have, well, y equals negative 7/2 times, I'm going to plug in my negative 2 plus 3. Well, my 2's cancel here, and I have a negative 7 times negative, so it's going to be a 7 plus 3, is that right? 7, 8, 9, 10, which is 10. So y equals 10. For 0, I'm going to have y equals negative 7/2 times 0 plus 3. Well, that's 0 plus 3, which is 3. And then for 2, I'm going to have y equals negative 7/2 times 2 plus 3. Well, that's negative 7 plus 3, which is 7, 6, 5, 4, negative 4. Y equals negative 4. All right. So let's start graphing these. We look at that first point, negative 2, 10. Well, that's going to be way up here, right? It's going to be off the graph. I'm okay with it. If you end up doing one of these, if you do your T-chart and you get a point that is off the graph, that's okay. Just go ahead and skip that point. If you want to try to, if you're doing it on scratch paper, you can make extra hash marks on your graph, or you can just skip it. So I'll go on to 0, 3, and then 2, negative 4. Now, I just said that we can skip points. If it ends up being to where you only have one point that's on the graph, you need to do something different, okay? You need to have at least 2 points. I like to have 3 points, but if one of them's off the graph, then I'll accept that. So we have 2 points, we can draw our line, and I know my line isn't beautiful, but it does what it's supposed to. It shows us what the line is supposed to look like. So that's that, and let me draw a little line there to separate the problems. All right, last up. So we'll draw our T-chart, x, y. I'm going to use 0. And then we want to decide what are we going to use for our other x's. Well, this one also, just like in number 4, has a denominator of 2. So I'm going to use negative 2 and positive 2. Let's look back up at number 3 for just a second. If we look at number 3, I plugged in a negative 3 and a positive 3. The reason that I did that was because I had a denominator of 3, right? You normally want to use whatever your denominator is. So whenever I go to plug in here, I'm going to have, well, y equals negative 5/2 times negative 2 minus 3. My 2's cancel, and I have negative 5 times negative, which gives me a positive 5 minus 3, which gives me a 2. Whenever I plug in 0, I'm going to have y equals negative 5 halves times 0 minus 3, which is 0 minus 3, which is negative 3. And lastly, whenever I plug in a positive 2, I have y equals negative 5 halves times 2 minus 3, which gives me a negative 5 minus 3, which gives me a negative 8. All right, let's go and graph our points. I have negative 2, 2, 0, negative 3, and 2, negative 8, which would be somewhere down there. And I will sketch my line. All right, there we are. So that's how we graph lines using a T-chart.